Calvin Castine here with a group of guys just sitting around the table, and a picture that was or is on your screen right now is a nameplate that one of these gentlemen brought in, the T.W. and C.B. Sheridan Company, established in 1835, and that's going to be the focus of our attention today. This is a program that I've been wanting to do for a long time. In fact, a great many years ago, I asked Gerard Juno if he'd be interested in sitting in this kind of show. He says, "Oh, my boy, I'd love to." And I mentioned it to Al Strack, and Al said, "Let me think about it." And then within a month or two later, Gerard had a stroke, and we were never able to sit down and do anything with Gerard. But here in 2002, we have finally gotten a group of people together, and it's the, I believe, 15th anniversary coming up very shortly about the Sheridan Company leaving the town of Champlain. Running our camera today is one of the last employees that was there, Judy Castine. And I'm going to go around the table, introduce everybody, then I'm going to give my brief history, then ask everybody else to just mention what part they played at Sheridan, and then later on Harris. Ernie Lavoie, Joseph Ernie Lavoie is there, then Bob Morgan, Al Strack, Bob Emery, Ralph Boyer, and myself. I started work for Sheridan Company as I just barely turned 19 back in May of 1966, and I worked in the production control office till early January of 1975. So I had a 9-year span, but these gentlemen here have put in, I don't know if we dare to add up the years when we get done, how many years these guys have put in at Sheridan. Ernie?
Well, I started for Sheridan Iron Works in July 27, 1940. And I retired in 1985, so I had a few years there. And I have to tell you something. I told Bob Emery this. When I first started, I started in the lathe department. And I was working for Mr. Bert Heiner. And the gentleman working in front of me was Henry
Gauvin.
Gauvin?
Gauvin?
Yeah, and Mills Lambert was in the back of me. Of course, kind of young, you know, and I just started. One day, Mr. Gauvin says to me, he says, "Would you do something for me?" He says, "My feet hurt." And he says, "Would you go to the tool crib upstairs?" And Mr. Willett, Smiley's father, was
Leo?
carried a tool crib. He says, "Would you get me a left-hand stovepipe monkey wrench?" Laugh, Fred laughed. Sure, you know, went up, and sure enough, Leo caught right on. He said, "God, I'm sorry." He said, "You're about 2 minutes late." He said, "All you got to do now is go see Ben Dane." He said, "One of his men has it." Hey, I'll tell you, man, they had me going around the shop then before I realized there was such thing. Never forgot it. Never forgot it. Oh, geez, God. Left-hand stovepipe monkey wrench.
And you spent 45
I believe
years.
it didn't take me 45 years to learn what it was. And well, after the lathe department, I went to work in assembly, in the service. But basically on assembly, I worked on the case makers and binders.
Right up till
Mostly the
85?
case makers.
85 and you retired. Yeah.
Pardon?
Until you retired in 85.
Until I retired in 85, yeah.
And then shortly after you retired, they decided they had to close the place, right?
I don't think that was the case.
You also built stuffers for all.
What?
The stuffing machines you used to be responsible for.
Oh yeah, this stuff is.
Those were moved up from Easton. You
But
were chief there for a while.
of all the machines, I like this baby right here. That's the.
Okay, Bob Morgan?
I started on March 9th, 1966, at my full age of 34. Started working for Al, industrial engineering, and kind of picked up the duties of so-called plant engineer along the lines, and held that position until about 1970, and then I was gone for 5 years, come back in 76. Picked up that job again as plant engineer and stayed that way till the company was sold on December 27th, 1987.
Now, you continued Did you continue, or are you still continuing to work for?
I stayed, I did not leave when the plant was closed. I stayed on with the new owner and developed this into the industrial condominium that we see now with about 57 different businesses in here, some large and some very small.
But didn't you have some duties too with AM for the closure of the landfills and stuff like that, and monitoring the water? And
Well, I still am employed by the Harris Corporation, yes. And I operate the treatment facility that they built in the town of Shazy. It's on Route 22 between West Shazy and Sagota. And that was built to take care of the pollution problems that occurred in about 1983-84 here at this facility. The place is still in operation, and although the amount of concentrations of chemicals in the groundwater is very, very slight, still exceeds state standards. I would at this point in time like to make a comment that chemicals that are in the ground down there would never appear in this facility. There were many other users of that same spot. But nevertheless, the Harris Corporation said we will take the responsibility for the cleanup and built the cleanup plant. And although the chemicals content in the groundwater down there is very, very slight, the best guess right at this point, engineering guess that the engineers who designed the system have made is that it's due to run about 40 more years.
so you got another 40 years to go.
The operation down there has 40 years to go,
That's
yes.
job security for Bob Morgan.
I seriously doubt I'll see 40 years.
So you're still on the payroll, so to speak, for the Harris Corporation.
Yes.
So unlike the rest of us, of course, Al, you went on. You went on to Dayton, but take us
Right.
from the beginning.
Just make one comment about Bob's explanation of the pollution up there. That pollution was caused by, I'm going to say ignorance, but the lack of knowledge of how to handle these chemicals. This is when the laws changed. We didn't come up to speed fast enough, and we got burned by it. There was never any intent to dodge any of the laws or the requirements, and that got proven that way. And so did the individuals that were named at that time was completely cleared of any wrongdoing. I just thought I'd make that point, Bob. Yeah, I came to work in 1947 in the pattern shop as a pattern maker, which was part of the foundry. And I worked in the pattern shop for some 10 years while studying industrial engineering. In 1957, I went into industrial engineering and really took over from a fellow by the name of Guy Haynes and developed the industrial engineering department, started methods, started a more formal plant engineering department. All this time, the plant was growing by leaps and bounds, and things like that weren't necessary before that. And in 1967, I went into manufacturing management from one job to another, from general superintendent up to plant manager. Most of those jobs are pretty much the same, except the title. Every time they give you a raise, they give you a new title and cut down on the raise. But nevertheless, the responsibilities were somewhat similar. Then I did, in about '84, I then started to become director of sourcing, where we were farming out a lot of units, everything from hopper loaders to portions of the binders and so on. Again, that was to meet the growing needs that we were having trouble meeting here. I did in 1987 go to Dayton and spent 4 years down there doing somewhat similar. I was corporate quality control, director of corporate quality control for a while, but then I went and started to coordinate the activities of our plant in Mexico and in Europe, both England and Germany, till I retired in '91.
Mr. Emery?
I started in June 19th, 1945. Started in the building department. From there, I went on to assembly for about a year when I got bumped after the war. Boys coming home. And I worked in the tool crib for about a year on assembling the rotor drums. Really with Henry.
Yeah.
Real poor Henry, now it's me and Orville. And then from there I went on to the drills, and then from the drills to the boring mills. And in 1960 I went on as foreman on the day shift, planer millers, boring mills. And I was a foreman up until they closed,
You say 1960?
1960.
When I started here in '66, Sandy Phillips who was ill at the time, never came back, was just leaving.
In 66, well, I think it was earlier than that.
I came in here,
No,
66.
Well, it was 66 then, sorry about that.
See, you're trying,
Gain a
we
couple
have to
years.
watch you about it. We know that now.
66.
Okay, and you stayed until when?
Until it closed.
Then you retired and became a legendary
I was
bus
in a
driver?
foreman in the drill department, see, that's where I got to 60.
Okay.
I started in the drill department as a foreman.
And you were in the third shift for a while.
Oh yeah, third shift for a while at the end.
Yeah.
Second shift, I worked second shift with Gerard. And me, Gerard, Red Roulette, Albert Borelli. That was it, in the third shift, the second shift. And the third shift, well, I don't remember who ran it back then,
Would they?
The shift,
in the 60s.
the third shift or the second?
Second.
Second
Well, Gerard was there for a long time. So he was
There
there from 1980.
probably was no third shift back then.
No, we didn't have a third shift then. Even then, the third shift was quite small.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I don't know that there was a boss of that caliber. I think it just kind of the foreman or lead man or whoever ran it. I don't think they had an
Third
overall.
shift?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't have an overall.
One foreman was tapped as the lead foreman, there was no superintendent per se. He also had line duties.
Okay. And if everybody else might as well do you too, Ralph.
Sure. I started in November of '59. I was working on Route 87 when they were building it. I was laid off there on a Friday and lucky enough came here and started working here on the following Monday. I started in the milling department with Bert Gooley, which I enjoyed working with him a lot. He's a great old guy. And then in about 65, 63, 65, I guess I don't remember for sure, I went into production control. Worked there until, actually I worked there until late 1980. I went out as second shift superintendent. And then a year later I went to assembly, I was assembly manager. And then, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 years later, I was the machining manager. And I worked there until November 1987. I was headed for Dayton. I bought a home in Dayton. Never lived in it. I was fortunate enough to find a position locally that I was satisfied with and decided to stay. And, I was treated properly by the company, no complaints at all. So that's my background.
Okay. The company you went on to.
It was Delagar. I was vice president of operations there for, I was in my 15th year, 14 and a half, 14 3/4, something like that. Very happy there too.
And now you're a retired old fellow, right?
Work for my wife now. It's a tougher boss. Don't get vacation slips from very easily.
Okay, we're going to check the tape. Every once in a while we get a bad tape, so we're going to check the tape, make sure everything's coming out all right, and we're going to come right back. Okay, there's so much history to cover in this, it's difficult to know where to begin. And I'm sure everybody here has got thoughts. We've known about that we're going to be doing this for some of us for a month or so, and others for years that we've known we're going to be doing this. I was able recently to get a little history of the beginning of the Sheridan Company, and I'll throw this out into the mix. And then I invite everybody here to jump on this. This is part of the new book that'll be out shortly as we're taping this on picture history on Champlain. One of the things we discovered was in 1820, a gentleman named Solomon Boswick, a local cabinet and furniture maker, listed, this is from Woody McClellan's notes, listed wood patterns for castings among his items. These were used by the Champlain Agricultural Works established in that same year of 1820. Their products include plows, mowers, tedders, rakes, churns, corn shellers, and other farm equipment. That operation lasted until the 1900s, and it really had nothing per se to do with Sheridan, but it's an early history of the foundry type and the iron machine type of work that was done in the village. A second foundry was established in 1840 by Thomas Whiteside in the corner of Main and Cedar Streets. In 1847, it was leased to David Finley and James Smith. Although the machine shop connected to it burned in 1848, it was soon rebuilt and continued there for 6 years. Now, this article from material that John H. Zerlo gathered up, I'm already seeing a conflict here when I look at this nameplate that Ralph Boyer brought in that says T.W. and C.B. Sheridan Company established in 1835. And this material that John Zerlo gathered was from a Sheridan publication. It says in 1854, Finley and Smith built a foundry on the site of the Sheridan Company, presently Kimpex. It consisted of a 2-story brick machine shop, 40 by 80, and a brick foundry building, 40 by 100, containing 2 cupolas. They made steam engines and boilers, circular saw mills, iron water wheels, brass and iron castings, stoves and pumps, and car wheels for the Northern Railroad, which was later known as the Rutland. The years that followed saw changes in the ownership: D. Finley and Company, H.W. Clark and Company, Champlain Foundry and Machine Shop, Champlain Iron Works, Sheridan Iron Works, the Sheridan Company, and then finally on to Harris Graphics and A.M. International. In 1880, the Champlain Foundry and Machine Shop was purchased by Averill and Kellogg, and they produced primitive bookbinding machinery used in the graphic arts industry. The T.W. and C.B. Sheridan Company acquired half interest in the company in 1887 and changed the name to Sheridan Iron Works. So apparently,
They were established before and then they bought it.
they did not originate here then.
No,
That's in New York City.
they originated in New York City, and we first started building bookbinding machinery by contract for 3 to 8 years. I can't tie it down exactly. And then the Sheridan Company purchased the Champlain plant, and that's when it became the Sheridan Company.
Now, was it from Averill, Clark? I know across the road here we have Lockwood Clark, and I think this H.W. Clark was one of his forebearers.
They were the Clark family and the Sheridan family intermarried, and that's why the Clarks got deeply involved. And Lucky's father was one of the Clark family, and Ted Clark, his brother, used to be the first president that I remember. But prior to that, his father was involved in the operation.
You remember the name of Lucky's uncle that lived in New York?
It was Ted and Alan.
Pardon?
Alan, I think.
His father.
It was Alan. Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. I'm quite sure it was Alan.
I could never see anything with his first name, just Mr. Clark from New York. That's all I know, you know.
I'm quite sure his name was Alan, but hey, don't hold me to that.
The one I remember was Ted Clark, T.S.
Ted Clark, yeah, they were brothers.
I remember him coming out.
Yeah. And they used to have the corporate office in New York City. And Ted Clark and his brother, and whom I think was Alan, was out in New York City.
What was the young Clark's name? The younger one.
Alan?
Remember he worked here, an engineer.
His name
Yeah.
was Alan.
I think his name is Alan as well.
His name was Alan?
Yeah.
He married Jim Averill's daughter, I believe.
Yes.
I think he still lives Vermont, maybe.
He used to commute from Vermont, over in the Burlington area. He used to commute daily.
So there were a couple of names.
Go ahead.
A couple of names. Clark obviously stayed with it right till the end with Lockwood.
Yeah.
And I can't put a face to the guy, but I certainly heard a lot about him. Jim Averill and I assume he's a descendant of the Averill that was involved in this plant way back in the 1800s.
I believe he was.
He worked in what, engineering?
Yeah. You know, his father worked here too, Stanley. Worked in the accounting department that I remember. And then, so probably the Averill that was involved was Stanley's father, would be my guess.
I think so.
Jim just died within the last couple of years.
Jim was engineering and sales.
And he probably, when the engineering department moved to Easton,
He was in sales then, and he worked out of Dayton for a long time. He used to commute with me.
It was ironic you mentioned the engineering department moving to Easton. That was, I'm going to guess, mid-60s?
it was, I don't think it was much after I started here, because they were here when I came, because I remember John Newbegin and Stanley Averill and all the other guys were around here. And
they moved to Easton. It probably was later 60s.
yeah, I would say not, about.
It was the earlier part of the 60s, because there was only, what, 3 or 4 of them out here in 66.
Okay. So I remember...
Had Les Coopy, Doc Henshaw.
yeah.
Newsletter guy, old Henshaw.
Yeah.
Got a convertible.
Thunderbird.
Yeah,
Thunderbird.
Yeah. You'd get out there and he'd line it up, and then get back in and line it up. I'd watch him through the window, then he'd get out and lock the door with the top down.
Henshaw?
And Stuart Reed was still here, but not for very long.
Yeah, but where I was headed, I guess, it's ironic that we moved the engineering department to Easton, and then shortly after that, the whole Easton operation came here. I say shortly, what was that?
78 and 79.
Is when the whole thing came.
Yeah.
The stuffers actually came earlier though, right? The machining came up earlier than that.
Oh,
We
yeah.
kept the sales offices down there. That's right. We brought the stuffers and all that in the early 70s.
Early, yes.
Yeah.
And
I don't know
then later
exactly.
on, the whole operation, which
Yeah.
like as you say, 78, 79, when you had the fun of building this new building.
Yeah, it was in the early 70s because I remember I worked for a guy named Joe Morgan who had moved up here from
Oh yeah, Joe.
from the Easton plant, and as I said, I left in January of '75, and they cleared out some deadwood. I got thrown in by mistake, obviously, but I got. And I should point out that if it wasn't for that, we probably wouldn't be sitting right here right now, because there were several of us that cleared out that week after Christmas. January 2nd was our last day. Included Rod Barlow, who was the machine shop foreman, Gary Duperrin, and several others. But Barlow said, well, a bunch of us are going to go down to the Beaumont after, and I was just going to head home. I said, well, I'll head down there. And so I went down to the Beaumont and sat with Barlow, and he told me about this new enterprise he was going to get involved with. Well, it wasn't new, but new for him, Woodman of the World. And said, gee, sounds good to me. So I got a hold of Dwayne Langlois, and I worked for Woodman from 75 to 86. But while I was with the Woodman, I started as a Woodman effort to put on local programming. And that led to Hometown Cable. So if I hadn't gone to the Beaumont that day, I probably would have never started Hometown Cable. So you never know what roads you're going to lead down. One of the things that is going to bother me the most here is all the names that we're not going to end up mentioning here, and names that should be mentioned. And the people who, we obviously can't have 100 people sitting around here, and there's a lot of other people who are just as worthy or more so than us 6 that are sitting here that could be adding to this. But we got to do it manageably, and these are the people that are shuffled down to, and we're going to hopefully do justice to what we want to talk about here. Is there anything else in that early history that we want to talk about? You say, Al, that it was by contract work. They had a machine shop here.
In the very beginning, supposedly, and we actually located some of the contracts. That was along about 1897 when the purchase was made. But prior to that, it was done by contract. Some enterprising banker, and I don't know which one it was, got in touch with the TW and CD Sheridan Company out of New York and got some equipment up here to manufacture.
So what were they primarily manufacturing? They had a foundry here.
It's my understanding it was primarily bookbinding machinery.
But before they got involved with the Sheridan?
Prior to that, you mean on a contract basis?
Yeah, before they involved with Sheridan, they had a machine shop here that was operating, right?
The only thing I knew about was stovepipe.
Stovepipes, that's probably
Stove
where that
parts.
wrench.
Yeah,
Yeah.
stovepipe. Not pipe, stovepipe. And we actually found patterns of many of these stove parts. And I think Lucky's got some, I'm not sure.
I'm sure Lucky's got a museum that
I'm sure.
we'd all love to go through.
Well, Lucky, you know, bought some of the machines that were here. Some millers and lathes. They're all operable. My son was over visiting his son the past couple of weeks, and he went through it. They're all operable. I think he might use them once in a while. I
They
don't
made
know.
the news Sunday.
Did it?
Well,
Lucky and
We
his son.
saw-
Oh, yeah,
with
with
the lighthouse.
the lighthouse. Yeah.
There's something that wasn't in that article. This is an article that my wife typed that was in, and it was in March 22nd, 1928 in the North Country. Now, you talk about a history there and what they built and what they didn't build and what people wore in the North Country or not even wear of it, their shoes, their ties, your curtains in the cars at the time. It's all made by machines built here at Sheridan.
Really?
Yeah, and it's quite an article, which you had to read, it's too much to read, but as an example right here, it said, it may also surprise you to know that the value of the annual output of this plant is right around $1 million. Now you're talking 1928. And what's, it's surprising. And that it employs from 150 to 225 men. And this was back in 28. All right.
how many employees did we have
And it's machine shop, foundry, and engineering department.
at engineering unit back then? When we closed in '87, how many?
Somewhere around 700.
87, was it, huh?
700. And how many people are employed here now, Bob? You've got most of the space filled up,
About 215.
and that's with all this, just about all the space filled.
Yeah.
It's amazing how you can have one company utilizing that same amount of space.
The 700 was total engineering, sales, like this. They weren't all manufacturing people.
But the engineers were here at that point, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
That was in the.
Yeah, they were all operating out of here.
Yeah.
Sales did a lot of traveling and so on, but many of them had homes here. Of course, we had sales offices in different locations as well, and they were included in the I can't remember if it was 720 or, it was over 700.
Yeah.
Yeah, obviously you're not going to roam around the North Country looking to sell bookbinding machinery.
Right.
You know,
Speaking of bookbinding machinery, excuse me, though, ask the old timers, when did the press business start in here? Wasn't that real early?
yeah, so I was just going to talk about the president, which we sold off in the 60s. When I heard him mention.
When we closed the foundry, we sold the press business, or vice versa. Those two events came pretty close together, which was around 67.
Was the found Judy was
I remember
69.
going down to Bruno's with Hamel, and we started to snow. There was a couple, 3-4 inches of snow on the ground, and they were quite concerned about us getting home. And they said, "You have snow tires?" Hamel says, "Yeah, you got one on the front wheel."
Those were all rear-wheel drive cars too.
It was something. I
So we
thought.
stay overnight.
No, we come on. We got stuck in Glens Falls. We stayed in a restaurant, Howard Johnson's restaurant. Until it cleared up.
now who was Bruno?
Oh, Bruno bought the press business.
And the presses were the ones that, well, one of the things they did was cut the fabric for the interior of cars, right?
Yeah,
Cut it like
or
raw.
cutting and creasing presses, die roll presses.
So they weren't had nothing to do with bookbinding.
No.
No.
They weren't book presses.
Embossing presses, like embossing the leather on your belts.
That's really what started.
And puzzles,
Yeah,
cut puzzles and.
yeah, Milton Bradley was a big customer.
Because Al sent me down to referee a fight down there. A great big guy. He was machining a cam for the press. And after a lot of experience, we got it down to about 8 hours. And it took him about 16. And I guess Bruno gave him hell, and Al sent me down there to straighten it out. And when I walked up to the machine, he says, he see me in the plant. I was just supposed to walk in and walk around, and he got in touch with me, the operator did. How long does it take to do that up at Harris? I said, I don't know, 3-4 hours.
Obviously, you were the right guy to send.
So, anyway, we got talking. I says, if you've done it in, I think it was 16 hours. I says, you've done a great job. I said, I'll run that by Bruno. Oh, incidentally, that morning, I was in there and old man Bruno come in. And of course, I can be diplomatic when I want to be. He says, what are you doing down here? I didn't call for you. I said, you see that car out there? I said, that runs both ways. Have a good day. And I laughed. This kid come out and got me. Because I wasn't about to take any of Bruno's sass. He wasn't a customer. And he was something. He was a bull of the woods, all right.
Bruno used to do a lot of subcontract work for us prior to buying the press business. He was a great friend of Jack Zerlin's,
Yeah.
and they hit it off in good shape. And he did some good work, too.
Oh, yeah.
Well, sometime Bob had to straighten him out.
Oh, but I went down more or less to set up the wedges and stuff like that. But
The information we had on the drawings in those days were left a great deal to be desired. A lot of it was just plain experience of the machine hands and the assemblers and
You
people
go
like
down and talk
Bob.
to him. Yeah, you go down and
Yeah.
talk to the guy in the assembly
Yeah.
floor, what do you
Yeah.
need here? And-
well, then when I took over the department, they had a gauge, an inside gauge and an outside gauge, and then we started putting dimensions on the prints. But if I never got a hold of the print, it never got dimensions. Jack sent me up to Montreal, up near Quebec City. I went into a plant, they had a press that broke down. And they wanted a wedge for a press. And I said to Andy, what the hell do they want with a wedge? I said, the wedge don't break. Well, the wedge that
Yeah.
raises the... Anyway, I got up there and they didn't speak English and I didn't speak French, so they sent out for a kid. And the kid come in and found out what he wants, and he said, the wedge they want to buy the wedge. And I went up to measure the wedge. And I grabbed the handle to move the wedge, and tooth fell out of a gear. So I brought that back to Jack. I smuggled the gears back in the trunk, 3 little gears. Jack says, I send you up there for a $5,000 job, and you come up with 15 cents worth.
Yeah, Jack was pretty good. One time he sent me to San Annabelle on an old style roundabout, just to measure the base of I forget the brass bushing that went into a base, just to get the size of, so you knew what to turn the bushing to, you know. I got there and the whole darn roundabout apart. And I mean apart. Well, my measurement took a month before I got done because I put the darn back together. I was living in Champlain at the time.
It's like going to fix a car and they got the whole car disassembled for you,
I
right?
looked at that thing out and I felt like turning around coming back. Old, dirty, greasy.
Now, when we talk about machines, I think it behooves us to tell people what a rounder backer is, or what a case maker is, or in this case what a press is. What's a rounder backer, Ernie?
What is a rounderbacker? Well, now that's very hard, not hard to explain, but you take a book that's,
From the back side of that.
well, we'll say maybe an inch or two thick, and I forget what size it is capable of handling in quite a while. And it will take and, you know, sometimes you get a book and on the end you will find a dressing like colors and a scrim feed. We call it a scrim feed at the time, but it puts the Well, it's like dressing up a book, you know, on the end so that it's not plain like this. And then it'll round the back of the book. And also, not the top of the book. You know, you open up a book and it's not square, you know. Well, that is all done by forming. See, the clamp, the book is in the clamp.
So this way, what you're talking about is the backing would be
underneath.
rounded instead of,
Yeah, underneath you have forms that go this way, and on top it's a pressure that comes down, and it will give you a nice form on your book. And that's all that does before it goes to the binder.
And there was different sizes. I remember machining them.
Oh, yes.
They would start like this and
Yeah.
then they'd flare out to about probably an inch and a half.
Different sizes, you know,
And
Bob?
down to, I don't know, about that size. We used to do it with
Different
around.
size books, you know.
That was a quality, that made a quality book.
so it's not
Yes.
something that you needed
No,
to
no.
put a book out. It's
No,
just-
but that's the old textbooks, the law books, and the like, there's a quality books. Encyclopedias, yeah.
And dressed up,
Yeah.
expensive books.
You seldom see that anymore. We quit building rounder backers,
Oh, a long time ago.
Yeah,
They came out with a new one, remember, Al?
a continuous.
The continuous. yeah.
Because you used to have to bring the book under this form and stop it.
Intermittent, yeah.
And it was an intermittent thing. And then as production demands got higher, we had to do it on the fly, and a new machine was developed for that, but we never built very many of them because it was another operation, and every operation cost money.
And the speeds,
Yeah.
if I remember right, the speeds were getting up in a couple hundred. The speeds of these books per minute that we were
I
reading,
forget how many.
a couple of hundred?
225
25 is what I thought.
is what our binders used to be
But it didn't, yeah.
rated at.
Per minute.
Steel binder.
Per minute.
Per minute.
Hot rod drive binder.
That's
yeah.
more.
Now, you say book, obviously the different thickness of books.
Reader's Digest mostly. like
Reader's
they come
Digest,
on.
TV Guide, but one of the biggest orders we ever got here was when TV Guide switched from the saddleback, which was staple, to a flat back, think of Reader's Digest, and then TV Guide became that way.
You
I
built
think there was,
18 lines.
right, for I think it was 9 different customers,
Mhm.
two to a place. That was a big order for us.
That was a big order, yeah, very big order.
I
There
remember
were gatherers as well as binders.
the sales guy had a wooden leg,
Pete Gettings.
Pete Gettings, he says, if I get that order, it'll take you a month to dry me out.
How many books would the straight line trimmer cut per minute?
40. 40 bucks, but you'd stack them 6
Oh,
high.
yeah,
So you
yeah,
could
all
produce
right. Yeah,
6 times
They
40.
went up in the hundreds, though,
Right,
yeah.
yes.
So it depends on the thickness of the book, obviously.
Right.
But it
Well,
was-
Reader's Digest is pretty much the same
Yeah,
every
yeah,
week,
yeah.
but wasn't it, they were doubled,
It was
we
40
cut one down the middle, or 40 cuts a minute.
Yeah,
But there was
it
something, it come out of there something like 16
Fine.
books per minute.
Yeah, I think it was 5 or 6 inches high you could go.
Oh, yeah,
6
they had quite a stack, about that high. There was a saw that cut the pile in half, and the knives trimmed the edges. The 3 edges that were left, the front and the 2 ends.
Yeah.
So would the books be on there all bound, as
Yes.
pre-bound?
They were under like a press,
This is
under
after
pressure.
the bu-
Says after
binding
They're all bound,
operation.
so all they're doing is just, like you said, it's straight line trimming.
Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
You'd have a 3-knife or a 5-knife straight line,
Or
or a
CT,
4-knife.
or CT trimmer, or, well, not CT as much, but.
CT does just one at a
HT
time.
also.
CTs,
That would do
HTs.
with HT, they're different depending on what type of cutting they want to do.
Yeah, CTs would only go 100, 125, and that was a stop and cut, that was an intermittent cut.
HTs would go 225, I think.
The HTs go 225, and they'd be cutting on the fly.
Yeah.
But they only had a 3/4 inch capacity,
Right.
whereas CT had a 2-inch capacity. So
So the
it
CT would
depended
stop.
entirely on,
It would
Yes.
stop and cut it, and the
Yeah.
HT would,
you got a better quality out of the CT than an HT.
what, any idea? Of course you guys know, what does the CT and what does the HT stand for? Of course you
I
guys
don't
know.
know.
I'll call Jim Patno later and they,
Sheridan, I don't know, I'm trimmer, the part numbers were VT and 14,000 series. CT, I don't know, HT either.
I think
Probably
these-
some engineer name, probably first name.
It could be, could have been,
HT could have been a Harris trimmer.
yes.
The CT was a Champlain trimmer.
There you go.
until somebody proves otherwise, that's what we're gonna live with.
These names were selected, I don't think always to have some meaning,
Just
but
to,
just a
it a-
designation.
yeah.
Right.
it's a simple name instead
Right.
of giving it some,
Like
Some
we used to have a
Latin name.
binder we'd call a rack drive binder. Well, we knew what that was because that was the one that depended on the rack across the top of the clamp to get its momentum.
That's what we bought the heel for.
Yeah.
Drill those clamps.
Yeah.
Remember, I used to drive the Dayman crazy.
You were the first heeled operator.
On nights.
The heel was the
They used
first
to-
numerically controlled drill press, the first numerically controlled machine that we had in the place.
They had a gauge to set the center drill die and the drill die and all that stuff. If I remember right, it was 1/4 inch. And I said, that's too much feeding. It's thousands of inches you feed. Being that 1/4 inch. So I forgot the gauge and I shoved 1/8 of an inch under there. So I picked up a lot of time in the course of an evening. I used to drive poor Lavacher nuts. I said, how do you do that? I don't even leave it. And he says, I can't do it. I said, it ain't easy.
This is the NC drill.
Yeah.
Norman Ashline ran for
Yeah,
20 years.
yeah.
That's the one. The old tube type control.
Same thing when they got the Mazaks in. They had all our engineers upstairs, and we'd get together, be in Danny, Melrose. And they take the drill, 2-inch drill, and they start feeding it at the point that if you had 1 1/4 pilot hole in there, you were cutting that much air. So I said, Danny, program that so it goes right down, and when that drill, I want to see a chip when that drill hits. So we reprogrammed all that stuff, and that was driving them guys crazy upstairs too.
Driving the guys crazy upstairs. Do you think we ever put out a machine here that looked exactly like it did coming off the draw room? Because these guys on assembly never had everything worked exactly right. You always had changes that are made. And
Made a lot of progress from the time that Ernie's talking about, where you had to go and measure a bushing in order to know how to fit a repair part, to the later one. But did you ever actually get it 100%? No. 90%? 80%? There was always some final assembly adjustment, particularly in the area of
No matter how
electrical.
close you got it, you know,
Yeah.
there's always that little,
But as we refined our quality control practices, got better machine tools such as the numerical control machines that Bob's talking about, we were able to do it closer and closer all the time. You'd be able to repeat the process.
well, I think one of the things that came in during my brief stay here was the advancement of the inspection department. I don't remember much inspecting going on in '66 when I started, but certainly it was a big factor here when I left in '75. And we were at a point now, originally when you brought in inspection, before it went to FPS, the finished part storage, you'd inspect it. But later on, after every machine stop, a number would be inspected, is that correct?
That's right. We had selective inspection for that reason. Of course, our overall objective was to make interchangeable parts. So you could take a part out of the stockroom and send it out in the field and not have to send a man to go out and measure it before you did it.
one big help is when they started drilling the side frames for the case-maker on the boring mills. Before, we used to have to lay them out. There's 4 frames, 2 right and 2 left. And actually, you have to frame your machine, you know, but we'd have to lay all these darn holes out.
And drill them by hand.
And then drill most of them by hand, a lot of them. And boy, when they come out and say, well, we're gonna do it, I think it was Jack, says, I see no reason why this can't be done on the boring mill. And man, he was right. What an improvement, you know.
What was that?
Save a lot of
The
time.
guy took over for Paul on the case makers from Shazy.
Well, will he be? Will he belong to
Well,
us?
yeah, Belanger, yeah. But we worked together a lot on that framing. I said, why did they turn that upside down? Remember? They used to turn it upside down and put them together. The case maker frames for some
On the
reason.
frames,
Yeah,
well, you had you had 2 right
Yeah.
hands and 2 left.
yeah,
So I guess you put them on top like that.
yeah.
Well, the right and left went together, and you would mark them. So when we come to put the darn frames together, we knew which one
Yeah.
we would work on. And he worked pretty darn good.
Oh, yeah, okay. Well, yeah, so they're
So you
within
just-
1,000.
You'd machine them at the same time, but
Yeah,
That
there
way-
was no,
Yeah.
that way they
Well,
drill a
within
hole here,
reason.
come out the other
I
side.
didn't read it.
But they would put it, for some reason or other, they put it together upside down. Or on the side like this.
Oh, you mean when we had them on the sawhorses framed
Yeah,
up?
yeah.
That was so we could put the center stretchers in.
Yeah,
You had two.
you had to lay the stretchers out.
We put the stretchers, 3 stretchers.
Oh, yeah,
And then the other frame
okay,
on top.
okay, there you go.
Yeah.
I didn't have to do that,
That's
we
right.
had it on a print and board them, and all they had to do was
But we
set them
still
by
had
the way
to-
they should be and bolt them
You
together.
had to frame them though, you know?
No, you didn't have to frame them.
That was quite a little process.
Now, a case-maker,
Pardon?
what did the case-maker do? What were the products?
What was a case maker? What was the function of the case maker?
What was what?
The case maker,
Yeah.
what did it do?
What did it do? Well, let's see, we can tell you that, I think, in pretty close here.
Watchtower
I can try
bought a
to
lot of
explain
cases.
it, you know, but
Watchtower Bible.
it involves quite a bit. I don't know. Well, to start off, I don't know if you want to take pictures of this or how you can do it, or I can probably take this out.
Well, we'll take a break and we'll come right back. You're on the air,
I'm
Ernie.
on the air, right? All right. You can show Ralph this will answer his question. That's a
Okay.
complete web. A case maker
I'll show Judy.
consists of a complete web, from glue box to the cutoff knife.
What
Okay.
was, what,
And
Okay, the glue box obviously added some glue that was gonna hold the book
what was the
together.
end product that came off the case-maker?
pardon?
What was the end product that the case-maker
The
developed?
end product coming up, now you could make on a case maker, you could make, there's 3 different kinds of case makers. There's 24-inch end feet case maker, okay? Case sizes are from 4 to 5/8 by 4 to 5/8 to 15 by 24.
And what's a case?
A case,
What is a case?
for a book, yeah, case. like I
A
just
case
showed
is
you.
a hard cover that goes around the book. As an example, that's a
Yeah.
case.
Okay.
So it's the cover.
So
It's the cover that wraps around the book.
If we said cover maker, we wouldn't be off. What would we-
Okay, I guess you could call it a cover maker.
For the lay person, it was the cover.
Yeah.
Now, here's a book here, now here's a case that I have, a case maker that I had never worked on. I can show you some pictures later on of a round corner attachment. And I often wonder what a round corner did, right? It looks to me like this is what it does, right
Yeah.
here, you know? And I never worked on one, and it's quite a process apparently, because from what I can see, on the end of the machine there, that extra is a lot of work.
The knives for those were very difficult to make. We had to grind them to fit, so they would slide.
Oh, the corner cutter knives.
Yeah.
Yeah, that there.
And when it came to round corners,
And round corner.
they had to be fit.
uh,
There was no dimensional
no.
accuracy to them.
But I am sorry that I never had the chance to work on one, you know?
Just as a sideline,
All
those
right.
corner cutters were a big repair item. We used to
Yes.
sell piles of those. It was a lot of money.
Yeah, that's a square corner. Yeah.
Well, that's what you wanna sell originally, then.
That's right.
So you can get
Get
rid
into
of
that.
that.
Before Ernie continues, the other use of the case maker, we used to make game boards, Monopoly boards and the likes of this. They were,
Something like this.
right.
Yeah, well, you can,
Milton Bradley used to buy a case maker to make game boards.
big customer of Sheridan, Britton Riley was.
Right.
So this hard cardboard-like object would go in there. It wouldn't, you'd actually feed that in there, right?
Right.
So they would feed it in,
And that's the web that he's talking about.
so you'd have a corner cutter, a side folder, and a complete case. That'd be the process?
Hang on a minute, I got some pictures here to show you the board feed, you could- corner cutter and everything, but we're getting ahead of ourselves here, you know? Now, to answer your question too, you got a 25-inch bookbinder case maker. Now, this one, it'll make a case of 4 to 5/8 by 4 to 5/8 to 18 by 25, all right? And the boards are fed from the side. That's a side feed case maker. Now, I've got a diagram here somewhere, I did have one.
These are pre-cut boards, Ernie?
The boards are pre-cut. And your felt, the web, that is cut to size, or they order it right to size, whichever you want it.
Now, would this case maker be tied in with other binding? You talked about a glue box.
Independent machine, with the glue
So-
box are all part of it.
what would the glue box be needed for if you're not gonna be gluing the book to the binder at that time?
No, which are you?
This here?
Yeah.
You're gluing the boards on the web.
The web is the actual cover.
This is your,
That
your
is,
web.
this would be a web.
Uh-huh.
And you'd glue your board onto it, and your side feed is when you wrap the
The
board
web, you're
around.
talking about that cloth-like outer,
Right. Webs
that
are made
will
up
go
of
to
a
the
lot of
cardboard.
different things.
See, and you can look at this, Ralph. The difference between the end feed and side feed case maker is the design of your case and your web, on your web. Your web will have a different design than the end feed.
alright, so you made this kind of binders too, so the web would be this red part,
The web is your,
and then the cardboard, the hard part in there, would-
cardboard is your hard
so
part.
you'd be gluing that'd be the glue maker, putting this onto there.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then there is a blank book case maker, which I've never worked on that one either. It's a two-way feed machine. The cases again are 4 5/8 by 4 5/8 to a maximum of 16.5 by 25. With lining and up to 24 by 25 without lining. Now, boards are fed from the side or end of the machine, whichever they want. See, it's both. It's a combination side feed and end feed pacemaker.
Now with this, you're feeding the boards, I can imagine that as the hard cardboard. How about this outside material? How's that fed in?
How's the web fed in, Ernie? How's the
There you
web?
have how they make this. The only thing
No.
I know how is the books.
In a case maker, how is the web fed into
The web is on your spindle.
It's on a roll.
Yeah,
So that would trim it.
maybe you want to take a look, pass it
Yeah.
around. Here's your spindle, how's your web follows up.
I'm not sure if Judy can see that, or if the camera can see that.
That's the web's up on
Okay,
top here, right?
so this little spindle up on top here, this spool up here would be the web.
No, right down here, the web.
And there's no web up here?
Here's the web right here. That's for the strip feed.
Okay. And this would be
Here's
the...
your web going up.
And this
I
would be the...
got pictures of that here.
Can you get that without a glare?
Can
Okay.
you get anything out of that?
Okay, well, we don't need to end up this show trying to tell people how to build a book here, so just so we can kind of touch on these things, I think.
Well, once the cases are made, Ernie, did we ever make a machine to put the case on the book? Put the cover on the book, a casing-in machine?
Cover and
Attach the
put the
case in the
cover on the
book.
book.
Yeah.
I've never seen one.
No. But to my knowledge, we never made a casing-in machine. They were
which is
either done
strange.
by hand, or there was another company that used to
Another company I think was making it.
making a casing-in machine.
Which is kind of strange, because you would think you'd want to corner the market and not let that other guy in there with a...
When paperbacks came into existence, the case maker almost went out of being. For a while, you didn't make many case makers, did you, Ernie?
Were you
Yeah.
weren't making case makers at the end, were you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Very few.
Very
We were
few.
rebuilding.
The rebuilding a lot of, one of our big customers was Watchtower Bible Society down in Brooklyn. You built a lot of those, didn't you, Ernie?
What's that?
Watchtower case maker?
Oh, Watchtower, you wouldn't believe the pictures I got. One time there, Paul, I think it was in the early 50s, I counted 6 or 7 of them framed up down on the floor in the lower bay.
Because I went down to Brooklyn and saw that operation.
Watchtower,
It's
right.
several stories high, and they they print books that were all quality books for their distribution. Because the casing operation was expensive, that's why a lot of companies didn't go to it. They had a lot of volunteer help. They had a system where the young people would go and work there for several months as part of their indoctrination into the society and so on.
One of the employees here, I think, went to work for Charlie Carter, used to work in engineering,
Yeah.
used to work at the Bullhorn.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure he went to work for Watchtower after he left,
Mhm.
or even before it closed.
Okay, yeah. So he was involved in one of the earlier layoffs, and
That's probably that.
yeah.
You want to see a picture here of 24 inch end feet with the glue, double glue rolls. And you asked me where the glue roll goes. It goes on the spindle. You'll see an adjustment. I don't know if this is a good picture or not. We'll give you an idea what an end feet is.
Now, these pictures here we're seeing were probably taken on the floor right here at Sheridan, right?
Yes, it was.
We took pictures of almost every machine we shipped out in various stages. And the case maker was one of the last cast iron frame machines that we had.
Okay, you just mentioned cast iron, and just earlier we mentioned, and I wanted to bring it up, that you sold the press business when we got rid of the foundry. Is that because of so many castings was needed to produce it, and it just all of a sudden you got to buy your castings instead of, because we kept on buying castings?
The presses utilize an awful lot of cast iron. 10-ton castings, 8-ton castings, a lot of them. The frames, the heads, what we used to call the rising beds, wedges were all massive cast iron pieces. They used to develop a lot of tonnage in their pressing action, and it was always an up-acting press. Except this one here.
Why don't we take a look at that? Bob Morgan's got a
This
photo
was a
that
style of press used for the same purpose,
he carries this in his wallet.
but the board to be cut was fed in a more of a horizontal fashion, or a vertical fashion, I should say.
Okay, we've got it frozen on our TV, so
This is dated 1963.
this is a 63, this is you figure a 70 model press. Not 70 for year, but 70, you mentioned a 49 press.
It originally started out being called a 49. Why they called it a 70, I don't know. Whether it was the 70 impressions per minute, these were not fast machines. And I believe it was because it was the impressions per minute, but that is strictly conjecture on my part, I'm not.
And in the description it says for die cutting corrugated 47 inch by 70 inch.
Okay, it's probably the size.
Yeah, 70 would be the. Now, each assembly floor had a head man. Who was
Chief.
Yeah, who was the press? Who was in?
Alex Cheyenne was one.
There were about 4 or 5 press people. Alex Cheyenne, Joe Cologne,
Your father-in-law.
yeah, going back a little ways, Goldie Manette. Harold Smith did some press work. Red Filio did some press
Steve
work.
Longdang worked with Alec.
Steve did some. I don't know whether he was ever a chief on the press floor.
He used to
on-
share his bonus with Cheyenne.
Okay.
Cheyenne would share his bonus with him. Oh, yeah.
Way back.
That is way back in the 40s.
Yeah, way back, the chiefs got a bonus for putting out machines. Each machine they put out at a certain time limit, was it, Ernie?
Pardon?
Was it a time limit that they had?
Yeah, they would
Get
put-
it out on schedule, they got a bonus.
Yeah, they would they would bid on it, they would bid on that machine. Now, they were allowed, I guess, so many hours or so much an hour. But then, if they could finish it 2 weeks ahead of time, well, they were making pretty good money.
They made good money. That went out in the 40s,
Yeah,
in
that
the
went
late
out-
40s.
Oh, yeah, that went out. Then they came out, didn't they come out with a red letter rate or something to make up for that?
Yes.
I think so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So what you're saying then is, now the assembly floor was full of these chiefs that built these machines. So if I'm a chief and Ernie's a chief, we bid against each other?
No, you bid on building that machine.
You'd
But
come
he
to
is the
an,
chief.
you'd come to an agreement on the bonus for that machine. You weren't bidding against another chief.
Okay. Now, sometimes, if a particular machine wasn't being built, a guy who might be a chief on a particular machine might be help working for another chief on another machine.
Yes, but that didn't happen very often. Sometimes the chiefs would share their bonus with select individuals, key individuals they had working for them, other times they wouldn't.
So the union was against it. The union put a stop to that.
The
Yeah.
chiefs were union
Because
people.
I remember Cheyenne would push like hell in order to get you to do something.
See,
Yeah.
part
I
of
worked for
the,
Cheyenne.
yeah, part of the reason that they used that system. These chiefs would go up into the machine shop and negotiate with machine shop foremen to get their parts done first. And some of them were pretty powerful, believe me.
Because I know very well about that part, because part of my duties, and of course Judy's duties too, when she worked for the repair department, was to negotiate to get your part ahead of somebody else's. And it always amazed me. I could go down to, say, an Alex Daniel, and if I may use your chest, Ralph, here to demonstrate this. Because Alex had this little pointy finger, and he'd say, "My boy," and he'd poke you, and you'd have little dents in your chest, and he got...
Yeah, he literally poked.
He wouldn't poke it at you, he would stick his finger into your chest.
But Bob was right, that when the union became, and really came into existence, that was all negotiated out. Some people had red letter rates to make up for it and the likes of this.
They had some machinists also getting the bonus for some reason or other.
And unions don't like numbers
Well,
to get
Alec too
bonuses.
used to have a little bottle of Robitussin. Remember that?
I could use
That
some
little
right now.
cough.
I think it was more than Robitussin.
Here's a couple of pictures you might want to show right here. Here's a bunch of case makers being framed, and here's one completely assembled.
Okay, we'll let Judy get the one being framed. These aren't being framed to hang on the wall. That's just building the frames for them, what you mean, right? I gotta get the glare out. Is that better? Okay. So that's building the frames for the case makers, what you mean.
Well, they're
Yeah.
framed, yeah,
Yeah.
they're putting it together in the
Right.
way,
Right, they haven't put the guts in it yet. And this is what?
completely finished.
This is a finished, this will be a finished case maker. And so this was still a product being manufactured here right up to the very end. Did they continue to make these in Dayton?
No.
No? So,
But there's, we were doing a lot of rebuilding here at the end of casemakers, and Prim Hall today has probably done, I'm gonna guess they've done 3 or 4 more since they're a bunch of people that were here, started their own business, a couple of people.
I think we turned the orders down, didn't we, towards the end? Because the documentation was so poor, we couldn't machine them the way we did other units and the likes of this. We couldn't machine them accurately.
okay. Ralph?
So we talked a little bit about the
the press did.
pacemaker, and then
Press.
we had saddle lines,
Saddle, yeah.
which was, as I said earlier, the TV guide that had the staples in it, hold it together, it was rounded. That's, saddle because it kept dropping what do you call it, the pages over it. And then
Over a
staple-
chain.
Over a chain, right? Then they'd be stapled, and then go on through a trimmer.
Didn't they call that a saddle stitcher?
Yeah,
Yeah.
saddle stitcher, and then it'd go on through the trimmer, and then you'd have the finished book.
Now, a lot of that was made in Easton before it came here, right?
Right.
That was one of the operations that when we just talk about Easton, now, was Champlain the major plant back in, say, shortly after they bought in up here? Or was Easton in Pennsylvania
Well,
always a major plant?
The operation used to be in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure where in New York City, but I remember the talk on the number 5 presses and those things being
So they had a
done.
plant there.
They had at least an assembly area there. And I'm trying to think of the name for sure. I think it's the American Machine Company that they finally purchased, and that became the Easton plant. That was a Pennsylvania operation, and they purchased that. I'm not sure of the year. And I don't think that the Easton plant ever got quite as big as Champlain, but it was a fairly good sized operation.
They called it the Sheridan Company down
It was the Sheridan Company down here,
there. We
and
would
up
call
here,
it Sheridan Iron.
Sheridan Iron Works. I think that came from the founder. We always lived in fear, if you will, of closing Champlain and moving to Easton, because Easton was so much closer to the central offices in New York. There seemed to be a lot of favoritism going towards Easton.
And it's in that Lehigh Valley there too,
Right.
which was a hub.
The labor market was much better. We had to train everybody. They could go out and get machinists down there and the likes of this. And just what triggered the decision to close Easton and move it to Champlain, I'm really not sure. Except that the skills and attitudes of the people up here apparently were what management looked for at the time. I wasn't part of that, but
Well, one of the things that I heard at that time was the fact that, for one thing, it was easier to get another job down there. So here you had more loyal employees. So a guy could leave the machine shop down there and go next door and get a job.
Right.
So you probably had more loyalty up here. Less competition for that workforce. And let's be honest here now. Bob Emery for a while, not all the time, but Ernie, these are the guys that paid our bills for the rest of us, because when we billed something out, it was the only time you bill was based on the man hours of manufacturing that machine.
right. The other thing, there was a trend towards going to perfect binding in the marketplace versus a saddle. So the saddle market became weaker, and the book binding, the perfect binding, became more critical.
Okay, so maybe we should explain saddle and the perfect binding. Saddle would be, you could take X numbers of these, and just keep wrapping them around with a staple in the middle.
That's right. Anytime you see a magazine, I believe Time magazine is still that way.
With a staple down the middle.
Yeah.
Staple down the middle.
You just
That's
have
a
to hold
saddle.
on to keep dropping the signatures out, I guess you call it.
Yeah.
Then it'll be stable.
And the perfect binding will take these and the signatures of
Take it off the press, which we
how
do.
many, it depends. I know we're putting a book together now, and I think we're just using one page folded as a signature.
Go to
But you
16
could,
up
but
to
you
60.
could have
Go
a
up
whole
to
bunch of them.
64, I think 64 pages in a signature.
And you'd have that, and you'd put that with others, and then,
That way, yeah.
Yeah.
Be cut and gathered in a gather. As it come down, each author would drop its signature on it.
so just grab a book and look at the back, and if you've got all these little signatures there, each one of those little entities,
The best way to tell is a square back versus a V back.
and that's basically the only two ways to do it, right? Either perfect binding or,
Years ago, they used to have stitched books, but that's going by the board.
And then in the square back, you put more sticker books.
Yeah.
Much.
Used to go through the stitcher before it went into the binder, right?
Yeah, they used, the sewer, I think, is a better word. We'll get stapling and stitching mixed up here, but they used to sew those.
So,
Smythe
exactly, yeah.
used to build
Hey, that's-
a sewing machine,
Yeah,
where they used to sew the backs of the books, and then when they first started, then they glue it off as well.
yeah.
If anybody's ever interested in the history of that, there's a book out called Books by the Million that gives the history of the printing industry, or the book binding industry like that. And the Sheridan Company plays a pretty predominant role in that book.
is that a recent book, or the?
No, that's quite an old book, and if anybody's interested, I got a copy of
Might be something that somebody can probably find on eBay if their
it. Probably.
books pop up.
It was published, so,
Books by the million.
yeah.
Okay. I want to get Bob Morgan involved in this conversation.
Yeah, Bob is being awful
He's-
quiet.
He's our host. He's providing the refreshments and everything.
If you
Now,
want to get
no.
Bob talking, you're talking about the facility. Bob
Yeah,
knows
you
like
were-
the palm of his
Right.
hand.
Now, were you ever involved in the manufacturing end, or were you the plant itself and keeping it up?
When I first started, they were attempting to develop a progressive assembly line for the CT trimmer. So all the railroad tracks and all the storage racks and bends and everything I had designed for each and every part that went into it. And that's probably was the biggest exposure I had to the actual assembly work of any of the machines. The balance of the job initially was really furnishing the guidance of the maintenance department and keeping the machine tools repaired that these fellows wrecked.
Particularly Bob.
We didn't wreck them, we run them so fast that they wore out.
But that was more my expertise, as well as maintaining the facilities of the buildings and all these systems, the air systems and so on and so forth. And then, of course, in 1976 was when the major expansion started here to accommodate the return of all the easing personnel up here. And 76 on through, we built what is known as the main Kimpex building up here now, the two-story office building, which houses all of the division people and the corporate people who come up here from Easton, all the financial group as well in that one building. And then right adjacent to it, almost immediately, we constructed the building that housed all of the engineers and the tech lab facilities that came up here from Easton. And then as soon as that one was almost completed, we started filling in all the space between the high bay and low bay as you see it now with so-called phase 3 part of the operation. And then immediately started to expand the Butler buildings so that the assembly people could put these machines together and do all the field testing here before they went out into a plant somewhere.
Now, did you have anything to do with the designing at that point, or you just implemented?
The design, I had quite a little time talking with the architects from Cleveland of doing the design work. And they would ask me what I felt about the strength of the floors and the type of loading we could expect in there and things of that nature. But to say that I designed it for that particular purpose, no. I did a lot of recommendation on the distribution of electricity throughout the facility and so on, but they did the actual design work, the sizing of the cables and things of that nature.
Yeah, obviously, to most of us, worrying about how the electricity got there, it wouldn't cross our minds.
Anything.
Yeah, all we know is that we needed it there. And
Bob had the ultimate responsibility of making sure that the design was what was required for the manufacturing operation. So while he may not have put pencil to paper, he was responsible for the ultimate design. Is that fair?
Yes,
Okay.
fair.
now, who did you answer to most of the time? Obviously, that would have changed at different periods.
Well, for the biggest share of the time, it was to Al Schreck. And just when we started drifting apart, I don't know,
I don't know.
77, 78, somewhere around.
Somewhere in there.
And then when the Big Foxes and that group came on, and my reporting kind of shifted over. Still through Al for a while with Big Fox, and then almost a Big Fox all the time. And or Lee Kern.
You also, as I think back, I don't know the timing, but when this building went up, you had to buy quite a few houses in the back here.
Oh, yes, we
Take
did a
over
lot
the
of
Cary
that.
House and
Right.
a few others. And also we had a line of houses that some employees used to live in.
5 houses.
That we own.
Yeah, those were gone when I came here in
They were?
'66. Yeah.
Really, they were gone, that's
Yeah.
They were here when I started, but I thought they were gone.
Yeah.
No, they-
And former Army lived in one of those for a
Yeah.
while. and-
Leo
This-
Gregor?
Yeah, just keep your thought, but just, unless you got a picture of that, but it's one thing that people don't think about is the company houses that you think of when you got mining town and stuff like that. But they were company houses. You got a picture of it?
Yeah.
Bob?
Yes.
At least a couple of them.
1, 2, 3 company houses, and then the garages, and a fourth one here.
So
Oh, Gilman lived in, was it Gilman lived in one
put
of
it down
the
here. I'll
buildings?
let you
Yeah.
get a shot of it.
Homer's
And,
father-in-law, Homer Marmy's
They
father-in-law.
had the brick
the
building.
company houses are over on this,
Yeah.
on the left side here, right?
Yes.
Yes. So.
And you see how the kitchen window, they can look out of all the windows and see the shop. That's the way the houses are built. Ever notice they're
So,
built in stacks?
Can you get a shot?
You
Okay.
stand at the door, you can see all the windows.
There's one house still in existence, one that Leo Gregor lived in.
Oh,
He
yeah,
bought
yeah.
it and he moved it up on the hill there.
It's
So
right,
it's in back of
Yeah.
Kimpex here. One,
Right.
Yeah.
second one up.
it ought to be a museum. We'll have to.
That's right.
This one was taken in about 1963, 62, 63, after they completed that high bay, low bay extension off of the original building. And if you look at this picture, you can look down across, Of course, Route 11 was Elm Street as it came up through the plant.
Right,
But over in the field where Route 11 is now, there is no Route 11.
that's right. That's a very important part, that Elm Street that goes by Timpex here was at that point Route 11, and that whole stretch that goes by the Parker Chevrolet and by, well, where Parker Chevrolet is as we're taping this, because they're about to move. But where Parker Chevrolet is, and then down by the shopping center, that shopping center was not there, and that Four Corners wasn't there.
This one up through French Village, Route 11.
Yeah, and Perry's Mills.
By the milk station, Paris Mills.
Yeah.
Just a little more history.
Paul,
During the
Henry, Al Riccardi,
Yeah.
and my dad on the corner.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Bob.
During the years 61 through halfway through 65, I used to travel out Elm Street here on an average of twice a week for pretty close to 36 weeks out of the year, sometimes a little more. And I was getting, at the end of 65, pretty sick and tired of doing traveling.
Who are you working for, sir?
Stebbins Engineering in Watertown, New York. Did all the major construction
west.
work for paper industries, so their stock preparation systems. So I had returned from Maine one Friday night late, went through the plant, went down past the plant, and one of the objectives that weekend, my wife and I was going to make the decision whether I go to Australia to seek employment, because there was really not much going on in the North Country. But there's an awful lot going in Australia. So I picked up the Syracuse papers, spread them out on the floor, and what did I find but an ad from Sheridan Iron Works looking for an industrial engineer. And the next morning I was on the phone, finding out about that job.
I know where that is.
That was in January of 66, January, February.
And you started here in March.
Yeah.
you're
And
still
across
there.
from the store, we used to have that little store there, you know?
Yeah,
Back in my traveling days, you could not buy a six-pack of beer after you crossed the bridge at Roasted Point. So I always kept this place in the beer business by stopping in there to pick up my six-pack, so I'd have something to drink Sunday night when I got over there.
so that's the only thing that kept that store going, because obviously, well, just talking about that store briefly, was it the sisters? What sisters were the Ashline's?
Ashline on it. Old man Ashline and his wife. I don't know about sisters.
Well,
Really.
I thought there were a couple sisters in there.
Pauline Dona was in there, and I think her sister worked with it for a while.
Then, of course, Jim Daly
Yeah.
ran it, and Howard Lamberton, named Loves, and Howard was the unfortunate owner when the place closed here, and that,
Mrs. Ashline married Bert LaFountain.
the barber?
Mechanic. No, the mechanic.
Oh, mechanic, oh, the guy up in there, okay, yeah.
Kind of in
Well done.
conjunction with this picture of that period of time, I was able to find the visitor's register that I thought that I may have signed in at when I started working.
Oh, right here, then.
And when I opened up the book and got it rummaging through it, it covered the period all the way through 1965,
But not,
and it ended the day before I started work here, on the 8th day of March, 1966.
well, obviously, somebody knew the value of that book, put your name in there and grabbed it.
Clarence LaFountain, he's been hoarding that one. He says, this is going with me. So I found his hiding place, and so he said, don't give it away anything.
So,
One of the names that checked in there, Al, was Terry Devine.
Yeah, right.
Armin's old buddy. He's
Yeah.
there quite
Yeah.
often.
And Lim Tipson, and the whole farm.
Is Red LaFlamme in there? Is
Probably.
John Serlo keeps talking about his father's buddy, Red LaFlamme,
Yeah.
a former ball player, and
We discovered him in Syracuse, in Schenectady. We were looking for somebody to build aluminum transports for the CP trimmer. And I just answered an ad in an industrial magazine, and I never recognized the Red LaFlamme. And I had him come up to talk to us, and I liked what he offered, so I brought him in to introduce him to Jack, and Jack recognized him right off. He knew exactly that he was a major league pitcher at one time, And I never followed baseball that close.
Right, but you,
And they struck up a friendship.
but a guy named Red, you
Yeah.
actually had a liking.
Oh,
for.
yeah.
Yeah, what was the name of the company? Was that Lasco? I remember when we used to buy.
Yeah,
them.
it was Lasco.
Yeah, we used to buy
Yeah.
those aluminum.
Yeah. They did a lot of work for the nuclear industry. at
That's
GE.
prior to 38.
Prior to 1938? Okay. I'll show Judy where the, we run out, there's only about 4
That's
people
my
in
brother
here.
Paul, Henry, Oliver Carding, and my dad.
Hold on.
You see that?
That was built upstairs before there was any additions, the old shop.
And your dad being,
Upstairs.
Pardon?
your dad's name?
There was one.
Yeah, that ain't up, well, they call that upstairs?
Yes, he was downstairs.
Oh, okay.
Got it?
Yeah, okay.
We used to say
Okay.
And
upstairs.
that had to be prior to
Oh.
1938 because he died January 7th of 38.
So I'm right in the front here,
Had to
that
be
picture
before
he's
that,
got, was taken right inside here.
Yeah. Okay.
Is that right?
Yeah, I wonder who he's got in 1838 there.
Another
This-
picture floating around?
No, that's the same
Oh, same
picture,
one,
but
that's the one we had before
some-
with the houses.
it's something to note that the railroads still show in there.
Yeah, that's one thing that I wanted to point out is the fact that there used to be some tracks that ran between the office and the
That's right.
and
Wow.
the plant.
It shows
And this is
it
it.
It used to go down between the office building and the main building there.
Right.
And that's how we got our coal for our furnaces. to bring-
Yeah, your coal and your coke, and I know I unloaded carloads of coke out there.
Yes,
Started here at 16, and then my father would stick me in that carload of coke. So I'll keep you home tonight.
oh,
That
Well,
railroad line that
Across
you
the tracks is
see,
an important statement.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
say that.
Yeah, well,
on that railroad line in the very bottom of the picture there, it runs close to the building, that was the main line.
Rutland, yeah.
For Rutland
Rutland,
Railroad
yeah.
tracks.
Yeah, and then the spur would,
would come in
Come
between
on.
the building.
yeah.
And there was another spur that came down in the other end that we would load, came right into the building.
The assembly for, yeah.
And that we would load machinery out of.
Yeah, but right up to the very end, you probably still use that phrase across the tracks when you're going out to the shop.
Yeah, yeah.
Because
Yeah.
there literally were tracks separating the offices
Right.
from the machine shop, and you'd all say.
They even had flashing lights in the door. The doors that went
Yeah.
That's right,
across.
I've forgotten that, you're
Yeah,
right. There was a
They
train
wouldn't
coming
open
through
the door
there.
and walk into the train.
Yeah, now,
I've
now,
forgotten that.
I believe the Rutland ceased to run here in 1962,
yeah.
so,
It,
obviously,
it took some years before the tracks were all pulled up.
yeah, right, but you didn't have to worry about that flashing light anymore
No.
after 62, unfortunately.
When they come in, they told me they was pushing a car in here. The guy says to me, at 12 o'clock tonight, we're going on strike. And I says, yes, you'll be out of a job. 'Cause my father-in-law was an old railroad man. He says, if they go on strike, he says, that Rutland's not rich enough, they'll shut it down. And they did.
I happened to be reading Jim Shaughnessy's book last night, not because of this here, but, and referring to the Rutland, and there was a couple of strikes. They had a couple in a year, back-to-back years, and that's what did in the Rutland, a couple of strikes, and they were out. And speaking of strikes, we mentioned the union coming in. I don't want to necessarily talk about strikes, but what year did 1065, the International Association of Machinists, is that the only union that ever operated out of here?
29, wasn't it?
That long ago?
Before my time, I don't know
Before
when.
no, 39.
39 sounds
39,
better,
yeah, yeah.
39?
39.
Ernie, do you remember when the union came in here?
1938.
There, got it from the horse's mouth.
International Association of Aerospace
Aerospace
I,
and machinists.
Yeah.
and Machines.
Yeah.
It was always the same name.
As
IAM.
I know.
Yeah, the aerospace workers came, the add-on of the aerospace workers came in later years. It was always a very good union to work with. We had a few disagreements, but in general, it was always an excellent union to work with. Most of it because of the people that belonged to it here.
Yeah,
Arnold McRae was union president when I started here. 'Cause he come and told me I got a nickel raise at the end of 6 months, 55 cents an hour.
Mr. Butterfield was a nice guy.
He was a nice old guy.
He was a nice chap.
Went home to dinner and died.
There was some relationship in your family with Butterfield, wasn't there?
Pardon?
Wasn't there a relationship in your family with Butterfield? No?
I hear you.
No, you're related to Butterfield?
No, it was Heiner.
Einer. Okay.
Heiner,
Yeah, yeah.
Albert Heiner. He
Okay.
lived, the house this side of Butterfield.
That's
And
right.
Butterfield lived, well, forget whose house it was, but
Okay, I'd like to talk about some names that, you know, obviously we mentioned the Clark family and the Averils, but Lavoie name is a name you obviously associate with Sheridan. Now, how many members of your family were here? at different-
in all, there was 7, because my uncle worked in the foundry for 50 years.
Give names, so.
Napoleon,
Napoleon Lavoie?
Napoleon Lavoie, worked in the foundry. Yeah, he used to live down the rapids, across the river. Then there was my brother Paul, my brother Nazaire, my brother Henry, myself, and my oldest daughter, Berna Badger. She worked in the office, I think it was about a year and a half, when Ron was in Vietnam.
And your father?
Claude worked there in the shop.
Sure.
That's
Claude
what he had in
did.
the shop. He worked
Yeah.
in the office,
And your
yeah.
father
Yeah.
worked here too?
Who?
Your father?
And my dad, well, yes,
Yeah.
I do, it was all included in there,
Yeah.
yeah, my father, yeah.
Yeah, and Claude, your cousin
Senior,
Claude.
Nazaire Lavoie Senior, Nazaire Lavoie Junior.
Right.
My father, on the day that, the last day that he worked, I guess he worked for about a week, he was sick, but he wanted to come in so bad on that day to get his 40 years in. Never went back in. He died January 7th, 1938, of pneumonia,
Is that right?
57.
Nazaire was young too, wasn't he?
They're 63, yeah.
Grigwares or Coulomb hold the record of family.
I think it was the Coulomb.
Cool, yeah.
If, at one time, there was 4 generations working
Yeah.
together here.
Now,
In one family, there was about
I
5.
think of
Yeah.
that too.
Well, there was Ledger, who was the first one that I knew, and then all his sons, Joe, Tom.
Was that Ledger or Jerry?
Ernest, Ledger.
Was Ledger? I thought it was Jerry Coulomb.
well, maybe
Yeah,
Ledger, Jerry.
Well,
Ledger,
they may have called him,
Jerry, yeah. the
he worked
Ledger.
on the little boring mill.
Yeah, because the day Jack hired me, he was talking with him, and I walked in and I asked him for a job.
Okay.
You know, Jack, start tomorrow morning. Okay, I'll be here tomorrow morning.
They may have called him Jerry, but his name was Ledger.
Yeah, I
And he
tell
had
you
4
right
or
now, I
5
think about it,
boys
yeah.
working here.
Well, Ivan?
Yeah, Ivan,
Ernie.
Ernie, Tom, Louis, what they call Mitt. Yeah, that was Louis.
What
Joe,
What was the name of the one they called Mitt?
Louis,
That was Lewis.
Morris.
Yeah.
See, that's 6 or 7 boys
There was-
at one time.
And there were some sons that came out of that. too.
Well, at one time, there was Ledger, Joe, Lester, and Jim. And
3
Joe-
generations.
Yeah, 4 generations.
4, yeah.
Yeah, 4 generations.
And the
Well,
son.
the old man wasn't here when the boys started.
Yeah, when he first started.
Ledger was
It didn't last very long.
No.
Ledger was still working when I came in 1940.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was working at a board mill.
Yeah, oh yeah, I was here when I was in
Oh, was he?
45. He was running a little Lucas.
Small
Yes.
one there,
Yeah.
yeah, in the middle there by the aisle.
And old Coonan, they had him up on the landing, remember? You were probably in the service then. And give him an award. He had worked here, I believe, 60 years.
You got
Oh,
Darcy's
Mr.
father?
Coonan.
Yeah, Darcy's father.
60 years, you're
60
right.
years he worked here.
Can you imagine, 60 years?
He used to tell me he run a lathe like you run a sewing machine. You pump it by hand. Unless he was joshing me, I don't know.
He worked right behind the office.
Yeah.
Yes,
Well,
yeah.
they all work there.
Yeah.
Darcy, Danny, and they all run lathes.
And gear cutters, at least when I came, were across the aisle.
Yeah, probably out in
That was
Hamel-
Lester, and his
Hamel.
father, I think,
Yeah.
was there a short period of time. on it.
Father. And Ernie.
Ernie worked there for a
Yeah.
while.
Yeah.
So Hamel was another name.
Yeah.
An old major used to cut sprockets on a little miller out there. Bill Major. And those fall, I worked after him on there. Bert put me on there making sprockets. I think that ain't a boring job. No.
Well, your father worked here, your
Yeah.
Roland, so just a couple generations. Any of your brothers ever worked here?
No.
Just-
Yeah, Blondie worked here for a while.
Oh yeah, that's right too. Not very long. My back in service.
Russell may have for a while, but Blondie ran a board.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I forgot too, Stanley, the Maziers boy worked here for a while.
Stanley Law.
Yeah,
Oh, summer
Yeah.
vacation.
that was, then he quit here, I think, and he went down to.
Mustard worked here too on construction. I think.
To around Poughkeepsie.
Juno's had several,
yeah.
besides
Juno had a lot of-
brothers.
yeah.
You had Albert, his brother Albert, Raymond, and Andy. You had-
And,
That's four brothers right there. Then Bobby,
Albert,
Bobby and
Raced on
Guy.
the crane.
Yeah.
Albert, I don't know if
Yeah.
you said that. Yeah, Bobby, Guy,
Bobby and Guy, yeah.
And the Great Wares.
Greg Brace were a big fan.
Yeah, big family worked there. A lot of them worked in the
Foundry.
foundry.
Yeah.
They were foundry folks.
I remember the foundry when I was a kid, when they get out of work, you'd think they'd come out of a coal mine. They'd walk down, of course, back then during the war, you didn't drive, you got 4 gallons of gas a week, so you didn't go very far, and they'd all come walking down and head into the Champlain House. That was a restaurant. They were hungry.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about the Great Wares house, I'm talking about the whole group.
Yeah, the Foundry.
The foundry, that'd be thirsty work. I
Yeah.
mean,
Oh,
if they're
that was
outside,
dirty
it's
in
that
there.
The
dusty
company that they bought,
and dirty.
value of $18. Castings.
Talk about the stuffers and all, that was one other machine.
Huh?
Yeah, I don't recognize
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
Then you will have covered all of that.
Okay, well, Ralph said we got one more machine area we haven't covered. We covered the
We
binder.
talked a bit about the stuffers, which threw a bunch of advertising in the newspapers. Right?
Mhm. That was very lucrative.
Yeah, it was very profitable. This man built many stuffers.
Pardon?
You built a lot of stuffers with him.
Stuffers? Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have any pictures.
No, it's all right, but we did run, you did build quite a few of them. And that also came from Easton.
And,
It was 72 pocket, 48 pocket,
24.
24.
We started off on a 24 pocket.
which
And
mean
then-
24 different
Yeah,
stuffing.
it was built on a carousel,
Yeah.
and then a hopper above it. And it would drop.
And then we went to a 48 pocket and a 72. That 72, I forget how many magazines, how many papers it took out a minute.
I don't
They
think I
had
want.
12 hoppers on them.
I think those got into 13,000 something an hour also.
Oh yeah, it's
Yeah.
in the
I think they were
thousands,
about the
yeah.
Yeah. They were high speed.
Yeah.
And then we
Put them
got,
out.
And then, aside from that, we kind of at the end got into, I'll call it peripheral equipment, taking it from the stuffers, taking it from the trimmers, where we got into tires and bundlers.
tires, bundles, stackers, shrink wraps, almost
Where
everything.
you could, you know, and it also the label, you know, they used to blow the label, your address label on, we
Yeah.
built a machine.
Inkjet, the labels on some
Where
of
they'd
them.
actually shoot the inkjet into that machine, under the paper going through it,
Mhm.
at these 13,000 an hour, thinking how fast it had to dry, you know, shoot that out.
Goes right around. And to this day, when I think about you mentioned stuffers, I would get frustrated because they could never stop the pulsing in the rotor. You know, it was chain driven, sprocket and chain driven, and there's no way in the dickens that you're going to stop that little pulsing. And the engineer was bound and determined that I was doing something wrong. I wasn't putting the bases level or blah, blah, blah. So we even put the bases with an indicator.
Yeah, I remember that.
The time we spent on that is unreal. You're not going to take the pulsing out. You're just not going to do it.
So was this just a?
Just a
irritant?
chain driven, any chain driven machinery will tell you that you're going to have a low
Was
pulsing.
it an irritant to the people working around it? What was the?
No, it didn't affect the production at all.
Oh, no, none
But
whatsoever.
it was an engineering theory that they wanted a smooth running machine.
Exactly.
And just the inherent design didn't allow it.
Well, it was so big, it was like
And
a
that-
wheel running out of balance.
It was what, 24 feet wide?
24, yes,
Yeah.
exactly 24.
Crossed, yeah.
And so you can imagine a circle 24 feet in diameter.
And moving pretty fast.
Yeah.
A
Yeah,
lot of moving parts.
a lot of moving
And
parts.
again, just so people have caught on here, you just picture your Sunday paper and all those advertising supplements that are in there. That's what it's stuffing into the center of that paper.
Right.
So when you pick up, I can't imagine picking up that paper that the 72 was used for. That must have been that thick.
Well, you take some of the city newspapers are pretty bad.
Some of the
City
city
newspapers, yeah.
newspaper, and they went to a very elaborate system. If you go into these newspaper houses, they feed these directly from the press now, into hopper loaders, into the pockets, and then they're feeding the pre-printed advertising supplements through another line, and they match up to the newspaper and drop in. And the reason they do that is they get better utilization of their press time. When the presses aren't printing newspapers, they're printing the advertising supplements or the likes of this, or they're having them subcontracted and brought in.
You got so sophisticated at the end that they were actually like, was going right through conveyors onto a truck. They weren't put anywhere else. You got just
They weren't
carried to
being
the
handled
plant,
at all.
put right into, and they would design certain papers for certain areas.
The Reader's Digest is like that, isn't it? It goes right into trucks, they don't store it.
Now, I remember when Judy was here, she talked about some time, they had a line set up in the assembly point. You had a whole, I don't know what machine you were building, but
We did a lot of those, but probably the biggest line
huge
was a Montgomery Ward, was it Montgomery Ward catalog line?
Montgomery Ward, yeah.
That, for Hall, out in the Butler
Butler
building,
building.
it was 300 feet long, two of them, and we set them up side by side. Every component involved, we had to set up and run, and they had to approve it before they'd accept it.
Yeah.
That's the object of it. They wanted it to go in on their floor with minimum trouble. They didn't want us to design or manufacture the machine on their floor.
so here's a building that you're already utilizing for other purposes, so you had to clear all that out.
That's when we started to utilize that building for
Yeah,
assembly.
really, it was built for that purpose.
Yeah, the last section of it was.
Yeah.
A part of it was pattern storage, and when we gave up our foundry, we cleared that out. And then you put it on, didn't you, Bob? Another
So
section?
there was one section already on there, which we tore down. But one more on the street side, no, there's one more on the street side already, and then one other section. For that section out and extended all 3 bays,
Right.
all the way down
Yeah.
through the end.
So you're talking 300 feet, you're talking the length of a football field.
Yeah,
309 feet.
that's what the building is.
That's what the building
Well,
was.
that's a touchdown, that's beyond
Right.
100 yards.
Yeah.
And that must have been one huge idea.
Oh,
Did anybody take the picture? Where were you then, Ernie? Was that a nice picture?
I'm
There's a
sure
lot of
there's
pictures
pictures.
taken.
We just don't have them. But there was trimmers involved, gathering machines. Well, that was one of the early Capcom, which is computer assist, machines that we built. Wasn't the first, but was one of the early ones. So if a signature going in the pocket, if it missed, it would tell the book not to put any more signatures on it. It would kick it out at a certain time, so we didn't build bad books. That was quite a change in our technology at that time.
It must have been, as I said, quite a sight. Just to let everybody relax for a bit, including our camera person Judy, we're going to take a break and we're going to come right back. All right. Danger here of shutting the camera off because we all keep talking, and Bob just told us a fascinating story, and I was going to follow up on it after Bob tries to retell it.
Oh. We were talking about this boring mill, Ralph asked me about it, and we were doing some work for Hazlett, strip casting in Vermont. And this engineer we had, I asked him about, he had 2 arms sticking out, and I asked him how much that arm sagged. And he says, give me a figure of 20 thousandths, and I didn't know if I should believe him or not. So I laid it down and measured it. And he was off too. So he come down, looked it over, and he spied a core hole in there. There was a hole in the casting. And he was wondering about it. And he says, you didn't tell me about that hole. I said, that must be why you're off 2 thousandths.
That's 2 thousandths of an inch.
Yeah, that's
Over a long-
less than a sheet of paper.
And now,
I was just going to mention that this was a college professor that used to work here during the summer. And when he retired from college, he spent a few years with it in the engineering department. And his sole duty was, or his primary duty, was to do the stress of materials and calculations and the likes of that for us. It's a mathematical wizard as far as
Doc
I was
Henshaw,
concerned.
isn't it?
Doc Henshaw.
If I could add to that, he was one of my professors when I went to Clarkston.
Really?
So I knew him. He's the first man I spotted almost when I started work here. And when Al said he's a wizard. On the board, when he started off doing a design problem or anything up there, you know, he was writing right across there, going like this and everything. He said, "You fellas make sure you get this down now, right behind with the eraser, right behind."
Oh, my goodness.
He'd do a whole wall across like that. Unreal. I mean, his mind just click, 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 click. And another story about,
Much like those of us in the room here.
Yeah.
another story about poor Doc that I have to tell. Now, he was in Clarkson quite a little while. And I have a brother-in-law that was in Clarkson before I was. And he and his father went up one day to talk to Doc Henshaw. Because my brother-in-law was having some kind of problems. So they thought maybe miscommunication. So they went up. And it was in the wintertime. So they went, the building there, the classroom was where he said he wanted to meet them. We went through and got it all worked out. Well, I got to go. Well, where can we drop you off? Oh, that's all right. And, no, we'll take you to drop you off. So they went out the street. Two of them got in the car, and Doc was getting in the back, supposedly. Two doors slammed, they didn't hear the third door. Where's the... Get out of the car, and he's underneath.
Oh, my God.
He slid on the ice. Right underneath, got right out his back. They had to pull him out, they couldn't get out.
Good thing they didn't take off, assuming he was in.
He's very tall.
Yeah, big man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Didn't he spar with some champion boxer?
Oh, I heard that story.
Yeah.
I don't think so. But
He
Bob's,
was big enough.
Walcott, wasn't it?
here's you go.
Yeah. Well, somebody said he sparred with him, trained with him.
Maybe he got hit in the head too many times. and
No.
he was that smart.
Bob's description of Doc Henshaw coming to work and parking his car out there is pretty accurate. I mean, he'd get out and he'd look, and
That'd
then
be
he'd
perfect.
shift that thing another half an inch over.
That'd be
You know.
perfectly on spot.
I've seen him get out of his car 5 times.
Was he just
Just-
compulsive about that, or
Yeah.
no reason for it outside of just being a compulsive person?
He's a perfectionist.
He'd walk through the plant and he'd stop and he'd look around, didn't know where the hell he was. Took him half an hour to figure it out quite that long. He'd look around, then all of a sudden he'd get his bearings and he'd take off.
It's amazing, people can be a genius in some ways, and then,
Wasn't he supposed to have been either semi-professional or professional boxer at one time? Henshaw you're talking
Yeah.
about? Yeah.
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 yeah, we're trying to figure out who he boxed, who he sparred with, but, yeah. Now, talking about parking, I think the first handicap parking I ever came across was right here. When I started here in '66, there were 2 spots reserved. One was for Jack Zerlo, the other was for our friend Ben Dane. And, and Ben is almost 90 now, is still,
Mm-hmm.
Al probably knows the most about him. He was,
now this is a smart man too.
Yeah.
What was his function here at the plant?
When I knew him, most of the time that I knew him, he was the chief maintenance man. And he was a super mechanic, and while he didn't have a formal degree, he supposedly had as much knowledge as any engineer that I ever knew. It is said that he took his brother's engineering books and went all the way through them. So he probably had the equivalent of an engineering degree, but never had the credit for it. But whenever you had a problem, he could figure it out.
On that particular subject, Jack Zerlo one time approached me, said, I need a little, I don't remember what he called it, they had a little description there and the likes, and he said, will you take that down and explain it to Ben Dame and have him design that up for me? He said, I'd give it to Doc Henshaw, but he says, I don't want anything that's going to weigh 50 or 60 pounds, he says. He says, Ben can do that job. So,
And
Yeah,
of course,
we used to, under Ben's direction, we used to rebuild machinery, some of the most complex machinery around here, and set it up to thousandths of an inch, even the big planers and the like. Yeah, Ben was quite a mechanic.
Again, it's amazing how that just seems to come so natural to some people, and
Mhm.
Yeah.
they can be so smart in that. And Ben, like I said, in his late 80s, and he's still going strong, and you wonder how robust a man he would have been if he didn't have the polio and so on. It just,
But he used to climb the cranes and everything else, which scared the heck out of her.
yeah, but he had great upper body strength.
Yeah. Still see him in church all the time with his little cart. He
Yeah.
gets in and out of his own car, drives his own car. I don't think he looks much different than he did when he was working.
No, I saw him the other day, and I have to agree with you.
That's good.
He's
Is he still driving?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he drives very good. He has a spot right in front of church.
Right.
That's where I see him in church.
Now, we mentioned Jack Zerlo's name, and off camera, we talked about Jack. Now, did Jack Zerlo ever own a complete cigar? 'Cause all I ever saw him with was this little thing that was stuck in the corner, and he'd go around like this and talk with it in his mouth, and he'd go out and kick the parts and say, "I'm going to say this down, Andy." And
Or if he took it out of his mouth, he'd keep it there and he'd keep his little finger going on the end of that spark all the time. I used to watch him. He'd just keep taking the ashes off, and he must have had a callus on that finger that. He was comical. When he'd walk through, make his daily plant tours, he'd remember where some parts were staying.
yeah, it's amazing. All the things that, as you know, from being a plant manager, Al, all the things a plant manager has to worry about. He always seemed to know what parts really shouldn't have been there, and
It
he'd go
wasn't
out
too much you didn't know.
and he'd kick them. And
'Cause I remember one time we made a bull on the new machine downstairs. So I says, let's work during the noon hour, we get that thing straightened out before Jack gets back. Watched him go back, comes right through the door right downstairs. Somebody must have called him at home.
He had an uncanny knack of finding problems.
Oh,
There's no
He
doubt
used to,
about
when he
that.
came through the plant, we used to have a dispatch station at one time
Yeah.
when we started the routing. And Larry Jarvis and I were working in that dispatch station, and I remember him coming out in the morning, and he'd say, one morning he says, "What makes you think you can sit in judgment on these parts here?" He says, like, you say, I give that one 3 days, I give that one a week. He says, they were still here yesterday. I mean, they were here yesterday, and they're still here. He says, what makes you think you can sit in judgment on these? And you had all kinds of work in front of him. He'd say those things, but then he'd walk away with a smile on his
Oh,
face.
yeah.
You know, he didn't.
If you listen to him, he'd scare you half to death.
Yeah. We were talking about this off camera too, I think, where he went out and when we would be low on work, we did some work for Imperial Paper. Wally Bucket, he were big buddies, and
Black and Clausen.
Al worked hard with that, where we used to do a lot of work for them.
Right.
And as you said, Hazlet over here in Vermont was still a big going concern. So when things were a little low, guys like Al and Jack would go off and find work to bring in and keep as many people working as we could, because it fluctuates.
oh, cyclical, yeah,
I
definitely.
think a guy by the name of Phillips was working for Black and Clausen one day.
Yeah,
Because he come up and I was machining upstairs on Tom's Lucas, and Burnell was downstairs. Of course, Burnell was telling this Phillips what a great machinist he was. He was the best that we had. He told Burnell, he says, you want to see a machinist? Go and watch the kid upstairs. I had a rag on my head. The chips were flying and burning my hair, and we were pushing that stuff. That truck was waiting for it. When they took it out, they loaded it on a truck and shipped it out. He says, when you get done, he says, I got a bottle out in my car. He says, they tell me you like a drink once in a while. I said, leave it unlocked, I'll be out there. Lane said, you can't do that.
we also did a lot of work for the missile sites here. We're the only maintenance facility in the whole northern tier of New York State and Vermont for the missile site.
Approved site.
Approved site.
I gotta tell you something about the missile site. The hinge for one of the doors, always a block on metal, I don't know, about that big in it. It had a hole in it about that big. This guy comes and this is no lie now. Gets here about 6 o'clock. I was working nights. So in a hole there, says about that big. I said, oh, wait a minute, a hole that big. How big is that? I said, that big. All right, give a hole that big. He was gone. 2 hours later, he was down in Keysville. He was back. He said, I gotta have it a little bit bigger. I said, what do you mean a little bit bigger? I said, a little bit bigger. He said, okay, give me a little bit bigger. And I said, you want to check that? I said, when you get down there, I told him, I says, take a pair of calipers or something, put in a hole to give you an idea of what you want. So we come back the third time with a size. Now, they were probably paying this guy $35 an hour to drive back and forth with that Uncle Iron in the car. Yeah, today, he couldn't lift it, we had to get help take it out of his car.
Well, at least he didn't come back and say he wanted it smaller.
Didn't come back, no. Well, we could have fixed him up there too. We brought it down to, I see him the other day, what's his name, the little welder that was crippled there.
Worked here?
Huh?
Did he work here?
Yeah, a long time. Fade.
Oh, from up in,
Altoona.
Yeah.
He's, what the hell did he tell me he was?
Boy,
78 years old. I see him at Aldi's. We talked for about 15, 20 minutes.
Boy, how Jack used to get mad. I guess Jack and Paul must have had a game going there, but we'll say that that binder was ready to go. You know, it was running, it was been checked out and all. Jack, I don't want that thing checked tomorrow. Paul said, you'd be lucky to get it shipped next week. I know, you know.
Paul played that game with a lot of people.
He played that game,
Old Twen Banap used to sell baseball tickets back in there. I don't know if you know what they were.
Yeah.
They used to sell baseball tickets. And he never worked Friday afternoon. And I worked with him down there in the box shop. And then he'd have a few over the weekend and we would come in on Monday. Jack come down one Monday, he says, Twen, he says, if you take another day off, he says, I'm going to give you a week off. He says, yeah. He says, you give me a week, I'll take one, then I'll have two.
Open up.
Yeah, old Twen. I'm trying to drive nails like he did. He'd take a whole nail. We were building boxes, 2-inch max lumber for his export shipment. He'd hold the nail in one whack, he'd go halfway in the other whack. I said, that old fool can do that, so can I. Yeah, he was quite old. I used to call him Blue Eyes. Yeah, old Twen.
Well, you mentioned the foundry, we probably ought to throw out George Cameron's name. He was certainly a Mr. Foundry. Now, we closed the foundry, I would assume, because of pollution standards and so on. That was the...
Yeah, there was enough new pollution standards, it would have cost a heavy amount to bring the foundry up to date. The design was going more and more towards welding, and the corporation, which was, at that time was Harris Intertype, didn't believe in foundries. They wanted to buy all castings out, so they would not spend a nickel on any of the pollution control. We were operating a cupola, a 48-inch diameter cupola, and if you really wanted to become competitive, you had to go to an electric arc furnace and this type of thing, and it was just too much money. So they decided to close it.
It was certainly a lot more convenient when we had the foundry here, because every once in a while you'd machine a part. And
Oh yeah, there's no doubt about that.
you had a little power over that foundry that you didn't have over the foundry that
Yeah.
was owned by somebody else.
We had to take the buying set of castings ahead. As an example, for the CP trimmer, we always kept one whole set of castings ahead, just to cut the lead time down and the likes of this. Yeah, we used to be able to go out there and expedite castings, but we didn't do that from other foundries.
yeah, there were some machines that we built frequently. The CTs are always being built, but other machines you build one a year maybe, and so you couldn't have spare parts just hanging around.
Right. George went on to the purchasing, right, where he would buy castings, and
Yeah.
Mike Gregg were too, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Foundry.
George used to be the pattern shop, chief in the pattern shop when I first came to work here. He was the first man that I worked for. Then he went to the foundry, took Guy Haynes' place, and he operated the foundry for quite a number of years. Then he became a casting buyer, along with Mike.
Now,
Haynes took over after Yankee.
Yeah.
now George was, active in the youth commission, good public servant, but he also had a reputation out there. If you didn't want to cross the guy. Now, is this true? I've heard a rumor here now.
I'm going to say yes, and I'm going to stop right there.
Well, Well, my rumor is that some guy crossed him, and the guy was in the union, and he made believe he was all forgiven, promoted the guy, gave him a job outside of the union, and then let him go.
I never heard that.
I don't know. But knowing George, it's very possible. But he was a great guy, and you know, but he
Worked hard, he didn't do a lot in the community.
yeah,
Tried hard.
youth commission. He was Mr. Youth Commission for the area for so many years. I'd like to. You know, we haven't really gotten into some of the machines and what they do. And how much time we got gone on that tape?
155.
155. While we get into the machines, and before we get into another long-winded thing, I just want the machine shops that were here. We had, as you walked in the door, you had to your right the boring mills and the planers. And I think everybody watching can kind of figure out what a planer does. It's just plane material off. But Bob, what's a boring mill? This guy's not being very exciting mill.
Boring mill's just a drill stud on the side. Although boring mill's more than that. A boring mill is a miller and a drill and put together. And it's a little more sophisticated than a drill. You can do a lot with it, especially the automatics. You can mill a circle, mill a hole. But you can't do that on a drill. And that's about it.
So you'd have these big cutters with all these.
Oh yeah.
And that cutter would turn, and you would
Oh, and mill
cut
with that,
pieces
yeah.
off.
Yeah, you mill a surface, like I do the same thing as a planer, mill a surface. And then in other words, you put a part on there, you just about finish it complete. I'm boring now.
Yeah, so you could bore through it, or you could cut sections off from it to shape it.
Yeah, somebody else would usually put the finished surface on there, you could set up by. You go from there and finish it up.
Mhm. And on the left was the lathes, and most people are aware of what a lathe will do. It'll turn something and give you the shapes, and the drills, and everybody ought to be familiar with the drill. And then a mill is kind of a smaller version of what the boring mill is, except you don't use it to bore through
Or
anything.
miller, you don't do much drilling, you wouldn't really
Right,
drill it,
right.
because it's not necessary. But if worse come to worse, you could.
Yeah, there's two types of millers, vertical mills and horizontal mills. And they're primarily used for straight, flat surfaces or steps, seldom boring. On some of the smaller ones, we might have done some, like the Hartfords or something. In the lathes, there was two kinds of lathes, the engine lathes and the turret lathe. And they do just about everything.
And different sizes.
And different
You
sizes.
could do the little fine work or the great big huge things.
Right.
Then, go ahead.
And the drills, and I think we already mentioned the Zerlo spacers.
Yeah, that's right.
Because Jack Zerlo not only ran the plant, but he always looked for efficient ways of doing things. And one of the things that he started, he had designed from his ideas a coordinate table that would move in coordinates, straight A's, X, Y, what was the other? X, Y.
Just X, Y,
coordinates,
two ways, yeah.
Yeah, and you crank through, and you had a micro dial, so you could accurately space holes. When we went to numerical control machines, which basically all that did was to automate that function, most of our drawings were already dimensioned in such a fashion that we didn't have to go back like most companies and redraw our drawings to adapt it to numerical control machines.
We done a lot of work with those spacers.
Oh, we did an awful lot of work.
You got some outside work, some valves, well, a water valve, I guess you call it, with 3-4 different steps in it, and tapered steps, and with a hunk of iron about 12 inches square and probably 24 inches long, and all steel. And yeah, they done a lot of work, a lot of good work.
Yeah, they'd fit under any kind of radio drill.
Mm.
He tried to market them, and for
It
some
was
reason,
patented, right?
He patented them, and he tried to market them, but his timing, I think, was off, because that was when we started to buy the numerical control machines. So his timing was off. No longer was there a market for a manual spacer.
It was,
That would have been 50 years ago, that would have been something.
Yes,
Yes.
yeah, had he marketed it right off,
Yeah.
yeah.
so by the time you got the idea of marketing it, it was almost obsolete as far as,
But you know, that's something I'm gonna say about this plant. We were steps ahead of most manufacturing companies, whether it be Eastman or Dayton or any other place, in many, many areas. And it was the Jack Zerlos and all the rest of the people that had the interest of doing those kind of things.
They had a layout department before his spacer.
Yep,
I
that's
think
what
it was
gave,
Arnold McCrae.
Yes.
I think it was, and he would lay that out with a bunch of holes in the center, draw a circle around it, punch 2, 3 punch marks,
Yeah.
and we had to put our drill in the center of that.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why you couldn't interchange parts,
No.
because you
Getting pretty
can't,
close, but
yeah.
In fact, we used to lay out just about 90% of the parts of the machines, you know?
Yeah,
Lay them out, like you say,
Yeah.
put some blue chalk on there and measure off a rough casting, and hope for the best.
oh, and then there was one shaft run down through the building here, the picture of it. One shaft run down through there, and there was 2 millers, 3 millers, and 3 drills run off that shaft with a big motor on the end.
oh, years ago, we used to drive all the machine tools off a line shaft
Yeah.
and big wide belts.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I first came here, the cam millers were still on that, down by the, what was the maintenance department.
Then we had a belt-driven planer, a couple of them. They would switch the belt and throw it in reverse, and all you hear all night long, squeak, 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 and squeak, 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 squeak. Something would push that belt into another wheel to reverse it.
Automatic?
Yeah, automatic. When the planer got as far as you wanted it to go, this lever would chip the belt into another pulley and shove it backwards. And then we had that hydraulic. No, that ain't, which one was it we put up on the wall over here? Running right off the machine. I don't know what happened.
I don't remember that story.
Oh, we didn't tell anybody.
some things are better off not
Yeah.
knowing. Okay, how much time on that tape there, Judith? We're over 2 minutes, this tape is just about full, so we're gonna come back,
Oh.
we're gonna have to close this tape out, so don't go away, gentlemen.